morning, kind people, and we are back again. We are already at conversation number 4, which is surprising to me. And we are still in the second volume of the Collected Notes of Integral Spiritual Psychology. And today we're going to talk about what the notes call caritas, or caring for the dead. But I think there's a larger theme here of death generally, and its presence in our lives. So, or in the world. How shall we proceed?
Good morning. Good to see you, Piers.
Good to be seen.
I enjoy these visits very, very much and continue to thank you for them. Well, in the work of the school for, I think for a good 10 years, maybe more, we offer this course on caring for those who have died. And we're trying to, the whole of integral spiritual psychology is an endeavor to try to awaken the capacities of living body, soul, spirit, earth, cosmos in a kind of consciousness, and to try to do that in the middle of life in this, I might say so, decadent civilization. So it's not a matter of, we do meditations and leave and experience something in other worlds and come back and try to apply them. It's much more an attempt to feel and experience the intertwining of the spiritual and the earthly as one. In a way, it's really funny because I don't think it's doing anything, meaning anything new. I think it's going back in a new way to living very naturally. So it's, I don't even really want to call this particularly a new kind of spiritual work. It's how can we be fully human given what is going on in the world, which actually works against being human in many ways.
Right. So maybe just as a little context before we start, is it safe to say that modern Western European American civilization is the only one in human history that does not make an effort to attend to their dead? That virtually all other human cultures had an awareness that we need to, that we stay in relation to the dead.
Oh, yes. And it wasn't esoteric or anything. It was, very just a part of the culture. There's this extraordinary writing book called The Smell of Rain on Dust, Martin Prachtel. He does a beautiful writing of of that tradition and exactly what it does. And a lot of what we'll do is very indebted to him. I want to make sure also right at the beginning of this work with this chapter that I thank Paul Kuhl, because again, over this time of nearly 10 years, I think he came to certainly more than half of those. And he took the notes that are in the volume too. So Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, last time in the conversation on sacred service, we entered into a kind of a picture of a way of being with nature that opens up this sense of the intertwining of the wider spiritual soul, psyche world and the earth and the body. And the other way is, or an additional further way is being present with those who have died. And that's going to lead to a third way that I haven't really done. I'm just entering because it's much more difficult, is the relation between people, what goes on between people. And there can be a way to be present with each other that this intertwining opens up be, between us. So kind of get a sense of what this, we're simply trying to live what it is to be a complete, full human being.
So when we think about being with those who have passed, we're normally we're prone to a very materialistic kind of thinking, almost like conjuring them up from somewhere else, kind of thing.
Basically, in this civilization, again, I don't mean to be negative about it, but it's just in this civilization, when you're dead, you're dead. That's it. And then the rest is a matter of grieving and memory. But grieving and memory are about us. It's our loss, our pain, our memories of, but that's not a connection with the soul of the beloved who is still with us, but invisibly so. And so that's what we'd like to try to reawaken.
Mm-hmm. But to be with us invisibly so, it's not the sense of a ghost following me around.
No. In fact, that would be I mean, when that does, something like that occurs, it's harmful to the soul that is in that kind of situation. And that's kind of important because it is the way we approach being with someone who has died is extremely important. Because if we, for example, if we're emotional about it, that makes the soul of the one who has died want to be back here. Mm-hmm. And that is harmful both to that individual soul, but it's also harmful particularly to the families of those who are still living, because it actually produces a kind of disturbance in that family that is unconscious, that makes the individuals of a given family or extended family, makes those people, makes it very, very hard for them to determine their particular destinies in life. Because it's like it's a little bit like an interference that we don't know where it's coming from. And there's a lot of confusion and anxiety in terms of where one is going. And so the way of being with someone who has died, it becomes very, very crucial. to do so in a way that leaves the soul free and leaves us free. So yeah, maybe. So we're not at all also interested in the spiritual psychology. It does not have to do with communication with someone who has died. There's a lot of people who do that kind of work, but they do it through hypnosis. You can find a dozen or so people who are, you can visit them and you can go into a hypnotic state with them and meet the person who has died and talk with them. And that's not this at all, because that also seems to me can be quite harmful to the soul that has died, because it makes him or her want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a difference between communication and communing.
Mm-hmm.
In communing, we can be together completely freely.
Mm-hmm. And in communion, there's some sort of, maybe this is too causal a way to think, but there's a reciprocity that happens that is beneficial to both sides.
It is, but it isn't brought about by reciprocity. It's brought about by being in a kind of complex unity that opens to the first to the natural world, but to the everyday world. It opens up a sense of what we're always within this kind of field of a unity of earth and the heavenly worlds, the spiritual worlds. So yeah, that's it. So it becomes, once you can feel that, it alters your life forever. It's living then differently. It's living kind of all the time with this sense of accompaniment.
Mm.
And so we pay attention, like little teeny things become really important in perception, and they just show up and stand out. And you don't get caught in, like, for example, causality.
Right.
In the usual way. It's not, I do something that causes that person to be with me, or I ask something of that soul who has died and I get it and it was a cause effect. It's nothing of that sort.
So we're back at, it is once again a noticing of what is there.
Yeah. What is always here. It's like it's sort of like, just we live in this little space and think that's it. And that's called civilization. and now that this just begins to open up more and more and more and more and more and more. My niece says,
You mean there's more to than this?
yeah, that's the current Bible. You just held up like Trump held up.
So this is one of these areas that it's hard for me to get my head around, maybe because of the causal thinking kind of getting mixed up with reading Steiner. But Steiner makes a lot out of the desire on the part of the beloved who has passed to want to be of some kind of help to us. And is it possible to think that way and still be thinking out of integral spiritual psychology?
A bit of background is needed, in the sense that, for example, it's extremely helpful to read some I would say true account of what goes on after death.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a little book called Bridge Across the River.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the story of a man who died in World War One and did give transmissions to his brothers and sisters of what it was like in the spiritual world. So by the way, though, that was at the time that Steiner was living, and the brothers and sisters took this writing to Steiner, and he spent several hours, looking at it carefully, and they said it is really accurate. So that's a helpful thing because it shifts us out of our, if we just try to start thinking about the presence of the dead, we'll do it in terms of our habits of living here. So, for example, in the bridge across the river, there's a kind of a description, like when you die, you go into a region and it's like you're asleep. And what's happening during that time is there's a kind of shedding of the full material matter of our being. And then there's a kind of a waking up. And initially, those who have died really long and kind of grieve their loss. They feel, they long for us, and and they also experience us longing for them. But that experience is very, very painful to them. For them to see us grieving is extremely painful. For example, too, he says that people who die instantaneously, typically when they're in the spiritual world, they don't know they've died. It may take a long, long time to realize they died. That's a really interesting picture because it says, at least initially, the spiritual worlds are not too different from this world.
Mm.
This person whose name is, forgot his name. It'll come back in a moment. But in one place, he says, right after he died, he looks at a mountain that he loved when he was living, and he still sees that mountain, but he can see through it.
Mm.
So that gives a sense that the spiritual worlds aren't, it's not like they're up there somewhere. They're right here. They're right here.
Right.
So, he also says, you have to work in the spiritual world. And there's no Social Security anymore. But you continue the work, whatever you were doing in life, but now you do it at a whole higher level. So it really becomes a spiritual work. Like this person was a composer and musician, and in the after death, his work was to create 7 great symphonies, and they would be played in the spiritual world for the sake of the earthly world. So it gives that's kind of a beautiful picture of, oh my goodness, there is something else, and it's has very, very different qualities than here. So we have to learn how to enter that dimension and not expect them to enter this dimension, because that is so harmful, because it makes them want to be here. Then they can't find the way anymore into the spiritual worlds.
So, but there's still, so the forces of destiny are still unfolding even after we've crossed the threshold.
That's right. Yeah. That's really interesting picture, because we have to revision what we think of destiny as what is ahead of us. But what is ahead of us is already still here. It's already here. So it's, in a way, destiny goes on eternally. No, the great difficulty in this whole thing is that what I've just described is more the way it used to be possible to have an intuitive sense of the presence of those who've died. I mean, one didn't have to really do a whole lot. They would sense these kind of qualities, maybe not know what they are and be able to talk about them, but they're just living in a sense of I know my wife is always with me, but she hasn't come back to do that. That I'm open to where she is, for example. But that all changed. I think, I'm sure that if spiritual psychology has anything to offer the world, it's this that we're going to enter. I'm way back when I first wrote Love and the Soul. In one sentence, I said the world changed in 1942, ontologically changed. It wasn't historical change. The whole sense of what Earth is and what then happens changed at that moment, at the explosion of the atomic bomb. Because that, well, for example, Robert Oppenheimer, he was afraid to death that when the bomb exploded, the Earth would be disintegrated. Surprising, why in the heck they would go ahead and do it anyway is crazy, but they did. And the world didn't perish, but it changed the whole of the world for a spiritual reason. First, for the spiritual reason, namely that it opened a portal to the depths of the earth, to the center of the earth, and externalized the presence of a being within the center of the earth that is supposed to be there, but now has become externalized and is everywhere. In Rudolf Steiner's work, for example, but it's in many spiritual traditions. This being is called the Lord of Death. The Lord of Death means he presides over death. He is death, and and Earth is a living being, that eventually, in fact, is dying, but over many millennia. But as living and being a living being who is dying, that means there has to be something that being is also within us, within the human body. It's called the Lord of Death. But see, we without the presence of death within us, we would not be aware that we're living. How would you do? If you don't think of life biologically, it's way more than biological life. But how would you be aware if that you are living, if all there is life? How could I wake up in the morning and say, boy, I really feel alive today? There has to be an absence somewhere that makes it possible to feel alive. See, that's the right province of the Lord of Death. Though doing the right thing, the Lord of Death kind of makes an internal bodily space within us, so that life can pour in and we can feel life happening. That's the kind of the picture.
So with the atomic bomb, the forces of death now, is it safe to say they permeate things in a way they didn't before? What would the language be for that?
Yeah. It would mean that first of all, just concretely look at what has happened and why we are. We think that we control death.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the Lord of death that is promulgating that notion, because he's everywhere and is the controller of death. But now there's this kind of invisible presence of death within everything, surrounding us all the time. But it doesn't, you know, it doesn't feel like, oh, there's death everywhere. It feels like we have control of death.
Right. And so in culture now, you start seeing these imaginations of immortality, or a kind of prolongation of human life indefinitely.
Yeah. And so then all we have to do is begin to look, and you can see that happening. The most important present example is that the way in which this imagination of controlling death takes place is in relation particularly to collective diseases. By a collective disease, I mean it's a disease that affects everybody. Like, and we're in one now, the pandemic. And that's that's like the presence of the Lord of death. But we think that we can control that.
Mm-hmm.
We think we can control that. Or any, the same way, particularly, there are other collective diseases like cancer. There's virtually no one that is not in some way affected by cancer or heart attack or
Addiction.
addiction. Yeah, those that affects everybody. So it's they're collective diseases, and a collective disease cannot be individually healed except under some very particular circumstances. A collective disease requires a complete transformation of the human being, and even of the civilization. And we can begin to feel that is happening in relation to the pandemic. But see, it's being approached as if, well, we'll find a way to control this.
Right.
See the difference? And say with cancer, people very often they can continue a certain kind of living, but it's through medication and or they get through it because they already have a pretty deep inner life.
Mm-hmm.
You see?
Right. And the deepening, the cancer and the deepening of the inner life actually start entwining and working together.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'm so, because of my addiction work, I'm so of late aware that I've never phrased it like this, but that sense of controlling the forces is very much related to understanding them in terms of management and chronicity.
That's right.
As opposed to anything resembling healing.
That's right. Yeah. Again, I mean, because diseases are our civilizational way of seeing something that we can't fully see, which is something arrives that disrupts us so that there can be a transformation.
Right. And it's a collective.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
one is collective.
I'm thinking about a couple things that you and I enjoyed separately but together that really seem to intuit all of this, maybe not in a conscious way, but you and I read that book by Eduardo Duran called Buddha and Redface.
Oh, yes.
And that was set in New Mexico. And the rituals that were happening were in the context of the nuclear explosion.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that we both did is we watched the most recent, the 25-year after season of Twin Peaks, where he has that whole amazing surreal sequence revolving around the explosion.
Yeah.
And he's literally depicting the entrance of something.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Right.
Wasn't there before.
Thank you for those two pictures. I had completely forgotten them. So that there are those are two wonderful ways of getting a sense of, oh, there's some kind of realization for creative people who can begin to picture what we're trying to speak of here. Thank you so much. That's just great. Really helpful. I'll go back and particularly the Buddha and Red Face. Wow. Yeah. The other realm where we see, well, yeah, what's important to see is that we think we're living life, but what I've just described and are going to continue to describe, we're living death life. And that is why it's really important to bring this to consciousness, because, and it's more than bring it to consciousness, the only way through this is to be able to be from within the heart in relation with someone who's died, a beloved who has died. You see, that suddenly kind of opens up again. Oh, life is way different than this little, that's death life.
Yeah, the image I just got was death life is this contraction.
Yes.
Of trying to control or to, I guess control, steer the ship, so to speak.
Yeah. The other major area of the presence of the Lord of Death everywhere has to do with electricity and electromagnetic fields. And I said, when I said the Lord of Death has a rightful province within the body, and he lives within the body as the electromagnetic fields of the body. So you can see that those aren't living, that's death in us. Mm-hmm. And that's rightful, but that's now been externalized as the electromagnetic, technology. Mm-hmm. That amplifies enormously materialistic imagination. Mm-hmm. So the Lord of Death he rules the digitalized, computerized, electromagnetic world.
And you had mentioned how we're going to try to massively increase the number of satellites around the Earth. Yeah. So in a sense, there's some sort of attempt to enfold the Earth in these currents.
Yeah.
Or there is.
Right, there is. Right now, there's 4,000 satellites circling the Earth. In less than 5 years, there will be 40,000. And they speak of it the technologists who are doing all, speak of it as a net thrown around the earth.
Mm.
But that's a kind of a contraction
Mhm.
in that see, the surprise for both in both of these areas of health and now electronics, well, everything, see, the trick is everything seems to become easier,
Mm.
you know.
Mhm.
And that's by becoming easier, it means we don't have to do anything. But that's a way of saying go to sleep and actually be partly dead, and we'll provide everything through these devices and so on that continue. Well, basically, they continue to keep us asleep, and we feel comfortable, and we feel like we're being served, and there's advances, and look, all, but what we haven't looked at the loss, the loss. And this, I'm sorry, I have to say that. But as we go through this, it's not in any way, actually a criticism. This is just phenomenological description. It doesn't say, we have to shut down everything and go live differently.
Right.
It says it's more the question of, well, then given this situation, how in the world can we remain completely spiritually awake?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's this sense of a major way is being in connection with one who has died.
Um, I don't know if this is where you'd like to go, but it raises two questions for me. The first is is this sense that we can control death parallel or analogous or whatever to the sense that we control nature?
Yes.
Um, Even when we're thinking in these sort of more progressive ways that we can control nature through wind power and recycling, that's the same sense of control.
Yeah. And with particularly solar power and now this coming electronic age, it's happening. In a few years, there'll be all electronic cars. And see, in order to also allow that to happen, as again, we typically ignore the fact that 5G, 6G, 7G, and all the Jesus, they are they are that is physically harmful to everything of nature and including the human being. So, but that's kind of put aside, or well, that part is taken, and we'll give that over to medicine. But we just saw that medicine is the same guy. It's the
Yeah,
same order of death.
yeah.
So, yeah, the electricity is actually, just descriptively, way more harmful than fossil fuels to the human being. And it's odd that the justification is to say, well, look, the only way we're going to get out of the climate difficulty is,
Right,
it's
right.
just the way it works. It's kind of great, and if we have to keep up with that awareness. I
Mm.
mean, with developing full human consciousness. It's not their fault. It's our fault for not keeping up inwardly.
The other thing that came to me with the image of the net around the earth was the lack of cosmological thinking. That in a sense that here's the earth,
Yeah.
we're going to control it with these technologies, and
Yeah.
yet we're not thinking in terms of the energies from these far off celestial bodies, or even cosmic thinking, meaning greater than human.
It's not even very good human thinking because there's no such thing as an isolated planet. And what's happening, you have to look at the relations. The relations are far more important than the things. The relation, I mean, so astrology knows this, but do you know that, by the way, it's such an interest, the word mathematics first meant astrology.
Really?
The first very meaning of the word mathemate was astrology.
Mm-hmm.
That just meant that it was the study of relationships,
Mm-hmm.
not this and this and this, as if they were separate things. As soon as you're into separate things, you're into materialism for sure.
Mm-hmm. And hence Pythagoras was an initiate
Yes,
who had gone into the earth
yes,
and came back with a sense of the relationship.
yeah, right.
Quite an image.
Yeah.
So as we move through this time, this ending of something, and if we were, see here, the causality is just so hard to get out of. I guess how to put this. What would it mean to not have a relationship with those on the other side as we pass through this time?
Well, I mean, I don't know, other than it will continue in the same modality of control. And we get a little hint of it, get a pretty big hint with what's going on now, that uh, uh, it's the ultimate control is the control of the human being. You know, in total. So there's a kind of it's like as if there's evolving some kind of total worldwide controlling of human beings that totally remove any sense of inner freedom. It's not the outer freedom that it looks like outer freedoms. We're not free anymore, and so on. We see that if you look, if you look back at 2019 and what was happening right before the pandemic, what was happening in 6 or 7 or 8 countries of the world were huge, 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 huge demonstrations going on. And isn't that interesting that as soon as the pandemic comes, no more demonstrations? Do you see the picture? The sense of again where the Lord of Death is going is this, you know, rather than a kind of external realm like medicine or technology. Now it's how to directly control all of humanity. And if you ask about who, that's I don't want to go into that. I don't know, but that's your question about where will this go?
Right. And it seems like there's a couple things going on with that where, well, there's a few things I'd like to say. One is that there seems to be, at least in a certain part of the population, a sort of passivity around giving over control, almost as though giving over control of one's inner life or whatever that we're talking about is somehow preferable or okay or easier, like you said before?
Yeah, it means that the inner life is nearly gone anyway. So it's just really have to, and strangely though, in America, in other countries, although again, it's not, doesn't show up on the media, but in France, for example, there are huge demonstrations. I mean, millions of people
Mm-hmm.
in other countries. So, and that's a way of, I don't think that it's the helpful way at all. That doesn't necessarily bring about an inner life either. But there is some recognition that what we call life is really being taken away.
And then there was this one time, and I don't remember the context, where you posed the question, who escapes? And I found that very provocative because the way I took it anyway was that there is something within that is actually beyond the reach of the controlling forces. And yet, if it's neglected, it's as though it's not even there.
Right.
And there's a famous scene in one of Solzhenitsyn's novels where an inmate who's been just through the ringer, with the authorities and probably tortured and interrogated and forever and ever. And finally he says to the interrogators, whoever, he says, the thing that you want, you can't have it. And then I think he even says, and furthermore, I couldn't give it to you. And so he's pointing to something of a free nature in the human.
Mm-hmm.
That I wouldn't say is inalienable though, because if you forget it or you have no relationship to it, it's almost as though it's not there.
That's right. And that, at least again now, or the concern is the intensity of the things that make us forget there's anything even there. So at least I hope we can briefly go into the question of how to do this. What is a way of keeping and awakening a connection with? One should start with the beloved who has died. That's first of all much easier than if I try to be in connection with someone I acquaintance or even a friend. That's much more difficult. The connection with the beloved who has died. And because it's really very much like the process is very similar to what we alluded to last time with this entering into the silence, pouring attention into this place at the periphery of the body, just bodily, actually pouring, just feeling a kind of within the interior of the physical body, a kind of waves and movement and tingling. And that settles down. And then we gesture the word heart with our lips, heart. And then it's felt, you feel the presence you feel inwardly the presence of the heart as like a spherical space that is warm and calm and radiating even beyond the body. And the division between the body and the outer world is much thinner or dissolves. And you're in heart awareness. But then if within heart awareness, you also now place attention right at the center of the heart, right at the center of the heart. and you kind of see inwardly or feel inwardly a bright light at the center of the heart. And you pour attention into that light. And then you feel like the world is also this heartful place. So then we're in individual heart awareness and world heart awareness at the same time. So we do the same thing with now being in connection with someone who's died. And but the way that's done then is to first intone the name of the one who has died that you are seeking to be in union with. And then you do that 2 or 3 times, and then you intone the name of the one who has died. It's like this. I say, Robert, Robert, Cheryl, Cheryl. Ooh. And you do that deep and you feel a resonance in the body, feel it, you know, and that opens up this field of presence. It's just like being with my little tree that I talked about. Well, now I'm in union. We are together, communing. But then I don't think of it as communication. I'm communing. So with my heart, I would with my beloved, I would heartfully feel the question, how can I help? How can I? Then I might also then even you know in 3 little words or less intone what I'm seeking help with. Helping the world. Helping world. And that's all we do. And you don't get an answer. You don't get an answer in the way that, it's because it's not conceptual. But now we've opened the field. And it means that in daily life, something will show up that reveals that it belongs to this question. It also doesn't come as a conceptual answer, but you're now in the process of the answer unfolding. It'll just happen. It's so simple that it's very, very simple. But then you can see it becomes a way of living. And that way it means that, gosh, there's always a sense that there's way more than us.
Right. Right. So in a way, going back to that image, it's a way of, it just goes against all the contraction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And it has a sense of the way it was. You do live then within your destiny. Like if I notice something in the world and it out of this, and I begin to, the thing is to follow it feelingly.
Yeah.
And that may be completely different than my ideas or my plans or everything I tried to control. It's different. But
And so full body, soul, spirit, noticing that word noticing is so
Yeah.
telling, because it's not, I'm thinking about it and then looking for it. It's more here, and it's here too.
Yeah. That's image, you know, that's image, meaning that in an image, if you like in a dream, you're the dream consists of the dreamer, not just the dreamer in the dream, but you're aware of dreaming while you're dreaming. So there's the dreamer, the dream activity happening, and the dream content, all one.
Right.
The same thing. It's doing this in the world. It's like this psychic envelope at the edge around our body that we so that's important in that if I'm living this way, I'm aware that I'm part of what I'm with, an aspect of it. I'm not a detached onlooker.
Mm. Well, I think we did it again.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, thank you. That was fun. One more
It really
fun.
was. It really, really was.
Actually beautiful. Thank you.
So when we meet again, will we be in the next volume?
We'll be in volume 3. Yeah.
Very good.
All right.
All right,
Thank you.
Robert. Enjoy your day and thank you.
Thank you.